If somebody was messing with your medications, why would you keep taking them? That's the question I want to answer before I even start this story, because it's the same question I asked myself for 11 straight nights lying awake next to an empty side of the bed. My name is Walter Grady. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years running the parts counter at a farm equipment dealership outside Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was married to Carol for 36 of those years. Since I was a 27-year-old kid who couldn't believe a woman like her said yes to me, this is her story as much as it's mine. Maybe more, because by the end of it, she's the one who caught them, not me. The funeral was on a Thursday, the second week of March, at Wyuka Cemetery on the east side of town, under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to snow or just stay gray and mean about it all day. I wore the brown suit I'd worn to our daughter's college graduation, and I stood in that receiving line shaking hands. I don't remember shaking, looking at a casket that held the only woman I'd ever loved, waiting for it to feel real. It didn't. Not yet. Carol had died 11 days earlier. The hospital called it a stroke. Sudden, they said, brought on by dangerously high blood pressure that her medication should have controlled. These things happen, the doctor told me, especially at 61, especially with her family history. I believed him because grief doesn't leave room for questions. It just leaves room for casseroles and sympathy cards and people patting your arm at the grocery store. My wife had spent 19 years as the office manager for a man named Elliot Vance, who owned Vance Grain and Feed, one of the largest agricultural supply operations in 3 counties. She loved that job more than she ever let on. She used to say Elliot trusted her with the books more than he trusted his own accountant, and I understand now exactly how true that was. About 60 people came to the service. Neighbors, women from her Tuesday quilting group, my brother down from Sioux Falls. Our son Bradley sat in the second row next to his wife Chelsea, and I remember noticing, even through my own fog, that neither one of them had shed a single tear. Chelsea kept her sunglasses on the whole time, indoors, and Bradley kept checking his watch like he had somewhere to be after this. At 11:40 that morning, right as the pastor was closing the service, my phone buzzed hard against my hip. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name on the screen, Elliot Vance. I stepped out into the hallway, my chest already tightening, and when I answered, his voice was nothing like the man I knew. Tight, fast, scared, in a way that didn't match a man who owned half the grain elevators between here and Grand Island. Walter, he said, I need you to come to the office. Today. Right now if you can. Elliot, we're at the burial in 20 minutes, I said. Can this wait? No, he said, and something in the way he said that one word made my stomach drop. It cannot wait. And Walter, listen carefully. Don't say anything to Bradley about this call. Don't say anything to Chelsea either. Just come alone. Please. Before I go any further, you need to understand something about my family, because none of what happened next will make a lick of sense without it. Carol and I built a plain, honest life. I never made much money at that parts counter, but between my wage and her salary at Vance Grain, we paid off a little 3-bedroom house on Sumner Street, kept a decent retirement fund, and helped our son whenever he came up short, which had been happening more and more the last 2 years. Bradley was 34, married to Chelsea for 5 years, and the two of them had bounced from one failed business idea to the next since he lost his job at the co-op back in 2020. 6 months ago, out of nowhere, Chelsea started coming around on Sunday afternoons offering to help Carol organize her pillbox and her paperwork, since Mom's blood pressure has been all over the place, and somebody needs to keep track. I didn't think a thing of it. Carol didn't either, not at first. Looking back, that's exactly the problem with people like Chelsea. They make themselves useful before anybody thinks to ask why. The month before Carol died, something shifted in her that I was too busy or too blind to notice properly. She started getting these headaches in the afternoon that she'd never had before. She said her hands felt shaky sometimes, said her heart would flutter for a few seconds and then settle back down. Her doctor adjusted her blood pressure prescription twice, trying to get ahead of it. Chelsea had started stopping by twice a week, always with the same line, to help sort Mom's medication into her weekly organizer, so she wouldn't double up or miss a dose by accident. I remember one Wednesday coming home early because the dealership had a slow afternoon, and finding Chelsea alone in our kitchen with Carol's pill organizer wide open on the counter, and Carol asleep on the living room couch at 2 in the afternoon, which she never did in her whole life. Chelsea smiled at me, said Carol had just worn herself out gardening, and left a few minutes later. I didn't think anything of it. My wife trusted her daughter-in-law. I trusted my wife. 4 days before she died, Carol asked me if I remembered signing something with her at the kitchen table back in the fall. Something about a living trust, in case anything happened to either of us. I told her I didn't remember any such paperwork. She frowned and said Bradley had mentioned bringing some documents by for us to look over, and she figured she must have just forgotten. We let it drop. We had no reason not to. That's the part that still eats at me, Walter. Thinking back, we had every reason not to let it drop, and we let it drop anyway. The morning she died, a Sunday, I was out at the hardware store picking up a part for the garage door. Carol called Bradley first because my phone was sitting in the truck, and by the time I got home 14 minutes later, the ambulance was already backing out of the driveway with its lights going. She never made it to Bryan Medical Center. Massive stroke, they told me at the hospital. Sudden, unexpected. Nobody asked a single follow-up question, and in my grief, neither did I. Standing in that hallway outside the funeral home with Elliot Vance's voice shaking in my ear, all of it came rushing back at once. The pill organizer, the trust paperwork I never signed, the way Bradley and Chelsea had been hovering around my wife for months like buzzards circling a fence post. Elliot, tell me what's going on, I said, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't carry. I can't explain it over the phone, Walter. Carol left something with me, a letter and a thumb drive. She brought it to my office 3 weeks ago and told me not to open it unless something happened to her. I opened it this morning after I heard. His voice cracked on that last part. Walter, you need to see this with your own eyes. What's on it? Just come. Don't stop home first. And whatever you do, don't mention this call to Bradley or Chelsea. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up. I walked back into the chapel, sat through the last part of the service without hearing one word of it, and when everyone started filing out toward the graveside, I told Bradley I had some paperwork with Carol's life insurance company that couldn't wait, and that I'd meet him and the rest of the family back at the house for the gathering afterward. Bradley barely looked up from his phone. Sure thing, Dad. Whatever you need to do. Chelsea didn't even glance my way. She was already halfway across the parking lot, her heels clicking fast on the frozen gravel, talking low into her phone to somebody I couldn't see. I stood there a second, watching my son's wife hustle away from her mother-in-law's own burial, like she had somewhere far more important to be, and that cold feeling from the hallway settled down deep into my chest and stayed there. I got in my truck, a white 2015 Silverado with 160,000 miles on it, and drove across town toward Vance Grain and Feed, with my wife's grave not even filled in yet, and no idea the worst part of that day was still ahead of me. Vance Grain and Feed sat on the edge of an industrial park just past the rail yard, a low brick building with a big office wing Carol used to be proud to walk into every morning. I parked at 12:35, still in my funeral suit, my tie loosened, my mind running through every possible thing Elliot could need to show me. I walked past the front desk, where a young receptionist named Amber waved me straight back because she recognized me from the company Christmas parties, and I headed down the hall toward the offices. That's when I saw a car pull hard into the loading area outside the side entrance. Fast, careless, half blocking the delivery lane. Bradley's blue Dodge pickup. I stopped dead in the hallway. My son was supposed to be standing at that graveside right now, thanking the neighbors, holding his aunt's arm, doing what a son is supposed to do on the day his mother goes into the ground. Instead, here he was, across town at his mother's old workplace, less than 20 minutes after telling me he'd see me back at the house. I stepped behind a support column near the water cooler, my pulse hammering, and watched through the glass as Bradley got out of his truck and half ran toward the side door, straightening his black jacket, his face tight and pale, in a way I had genuinely never seen on him before, not even the day he wrecked his first car. He wasn't grieving. He looked like a man racing a clock. I stayed behind that column for what felt like a full minute, watching my son walk straight up to Amber's desk, not toward the offices, and start talking low and fast, one hand flat on the counter, leaning in the way a man does when he's trying to talk his way past somebody who's already said no once. Amber shook her head. Bradley said something else, more forceful, and she reached for the phone, clearly calling back to check with someone. I used that moment to slip past both of them down the side hallway, my funeral suit blending in just enough that Bradley never turned his head, and I made it to Elliot's office with my heart still pounding in my ears. Elliot was standing in his doorway waiting for me, his face pale, his tie already loosened like he'd been pacing the floor. "Walter, thank God," he said, and before I could get a word out, he added, "Did you see him out there?" "That's my son," I said. "Elliot, What in God's name is going on? Why is Bradley here? Elliot's jaw tightened. Because I called your house line by mistake this morning trying to reach you before the service, and Chelsea picked up. I only told her I needed to speak with you about some paperwork Carol left with me. I didn't say what. That was apparently enough to send your son flying down here to beat you to it. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. Get to what before I did? Elliot led me down the hall to his office without answering, and over his shoulder, without turning around, he said the words that changed everything for me. Your wife knew something was happening to her, Walter, and she made sure I'd be the one to tell you, not them. His office looked the same as I remembered from company picnics years back. Wood paneling, a view of the grain elevators out past the rail line, a desk cluttered with invoices. He shut the door, locked it, and reached behind a framed photo of the old dealership building to pull out a plain manila envelope. Carol's handwriting was across the front, for Walter only. If anything happens to me. She brought this in 3 weeks ago, Elliot said, sitting down across from me instead of behind his desk, which told me something about how serious he considered this. Said she didn't trust keeping it at the house. Said if anything happened to her, I was to hand it to you and only you, in person, and to warn you about who you told. My hand shook opening it. Inside was a folded letter, in Carol's careful handwriting, and a small thumb drive, taped to the back page. I read the letter, right there, in his office. She'd written that she'd noticed money disappearing from our retirement account, small amounts at first back in September, then bigger ones through the winter, transferred out 4 separate times. She wrote that she'd asked Bradley about a trust document she didn't remember signing, and he'd waved it off. But something about his face when she pushed had made her uneasy enough to start checking our bank statements herself, using her old online login from back when she managed our household finances. She wrote that she'd found a living trust filed with our bank, dated in October, carrying both our signatures, except she was certain she'd never signed it, and fairly sure I hadn't either. She wrote that she'd started feeling strange around the same time Chelsea began helping organize her pills, and that she didn't want to believe what she was starting to suspect, but she wasn't willing to stay silent about it either. There's more on the drive, Elliot said quietly. Financial records. Messages. Walter, you should probably sit down for the rest of this. Elliot plugged the drive into his laptop and turned the screen my way. The first folder held bank statements Carol had screenshotted herself, highlighting 3 transfers out of our retirement account totaling just under $54,000. All authorized under that living trust document neither of us had signed. The money had gone into an account under Bradley and Chelsea's names. The second folder held photographs Carol had taken of her pharmacy receipts laid next to her actual pill bottles, with notes in her own handwriting comparing counts. She had written that the numbers in her weekly organizer never quite matched what the pharmacy had filled for her, that there always seemed to be a few extra pills mixed in, small and oval, that she didn't recognize from any prescription she'd been given. The third folder was the one that put a hole straight through my chest. A screenshot of a text conversation Carol had somehow found on the shared family laptop we kept in the den for photos and bills. A conversation between Chelsea and someone saved only as Ricky, dated about a month before Carol died. Chelsea had written, "She's starting to ask questions about the trust. We need to move faster before she says something to Walter." The reply from Ricky read, "Just keep bumping the sodium supplement. Nobody's going to question a stroke at her age, with her blood pressure history." I sat there staring at that screen, feeling something come apart inside my chest that I still don't have the right words for. Elliot put a hand on my shoulder and told me my wife had come to him specifically because she was afraid that if anything happened to her, whoever was responsible would try to get ahead of the story before I ever learned the truth, and she wanted to make certain that never happened. "She protected you from beyond the grave, Walter," Elliot said. "Now we make sure that protection means something." I asked him why he'd told me to keep Bradley and Chelsea away from all this, and he said it plain. If Carol's suspicions were right, and the evidence sitting in front of us said they very likely were, then Bradley and Chelsea were capable of a whole lot more than moving money around. And if they realized this drive existed, I could be next in line, especially with a fraudulent trust document already on file that could hand them everything I owned the moment I was gone too. "We need proof strong enough to hand a prosecutor," Elliot said. "Not just suspicion, and we need it before they know we're looking." That afternoon, Elliot called an old friend of his, a retired Lancaster County Sheriff's deputy named Russ Kowalski, who did private investigative work now out of a small office downtown. Russ met us within the hour, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with quiet eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like he was memorizing every word. He went through the drive twice without saying much, then finally said the thing none of us wanted to hear out loud. "This is enough to open an inquiry," Russ said, "but it's not enough yet to guarantee a conviction on its own. We need the pharmacy records pulled through proper channels. We need someone to look at that trust signature. And Walter, if you're willing, a camera in your house for a little while would give us the rest of what we need. Because people like this, sooner or later, they talk when they think nobody's listening." I sat in that office, my wife not even a full day in the ground, listening to two men I'd known for years but never really needed, until now, asking me to walk back into my own home and act like nothing had changed while my son and his wife believed they'd gotten away clean. It was the hardest thing anybody had ever asked me to do. I said yes without hesitating, because Carol had trusted me with the truth, and I wasn't about to let it go to waste. Russ installed two small cameras 2 nights later. One built into a smoke detector above the kitchen table. One hidden inside an old radio on the bookshelf in the living room, while Bradley and Chelsea believed I was staying out at my brother's farm to grieve in peace. I moved back home the following Monday and told everybody I just needed to be around Carol's things for a while. It took 13 days. 13 days of forcing myself to sit at that same kitchen table across from my son and his wife, nodding along while they talked about helping settle Mom's affairs, listening to Chelsea bring up the house on Sumner Street not once, but 3 separate times, gently asking when I thought I might be ready to consider downsizing. Every night I went up to bed feeling half sick with it, and every morning I got up and did it again, because Russ told me the second they felt truly safe was the second they'd stop being careful. On the 14th day it happened. Bradley and Chelsea came by for Sunday dinner, and after I claimed I was worn out and headed upstairs early, the kitchen camera caught them alone at the table, voices low but clear as a bell. Chelsea said, word for word, "The account's fully moved now. Once he agrees to sell the house, we're completely done. We don't even need the trust paperwork anymore. It already did its job." Bradley answered, "Just don't get careless again, like with Mom. That pharmacy nearly flagged the refill pattern in October." Chelsea laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Nobody double-checks a 61-year-old woman's blood pressure history, Bradley. Nobody ever does." Russ had that footage locked into an evidence file within the hour. Combined with the pharmacy records his contact pulled, showing an unexplained early refill pattern on a sodium-based supplement that can dangerously spike blood pressure at high doses, and a forensic handwriting comparison confirming the trust signatures were forged, we finally had what Russ called a case that would hold up. Elliot looked at me across his desk that night and said quietly, "Now we bring it into the open, Walter. On our terms, not theirs." We decided to do it at the reading of Carol's will, which our family attorney, a woman named Denise Callahan who'd handled our paperwork for over a decade, had already scheduled for the following Friday at her office downtown. Bradley and Chelsea had no idea Russ Kowalski would be sitting quietly in the small waiting room next door, or that 2 sheriff's deputies would be parked outside in an unmarked car waiting on his signal. I spent that week acting exactly the way I had for the past 13 days. Tired, quiet, cooperative, letting Chelsea believe her plan was rolling along exactly as she'd designed it. She even hugged me the morning of the meeting and told me how proud she was of how strong I'd been through all of this. I stood there and let her arms wrap around me, thinking about that text message on Elliot's laptop, feeling nothing underneath it but cold, patient stillness. We all sat down in Denise's office at 10 that morning. Bradley in a gray suit, Chelsea in black, both of them composed, almost relaxed, clearly expecting a simple formality before they walked out with what they already believed belonged to them. Denise ran through the standard opening of the reading, and then, right on cue, she looked over at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to say before continuing. "Actually, yes," I said, and I watched Bradley's face shift just slightly, the first flicker of something uneasy. "Before we go any further, I think it's time everybody in this room saw what your mother left behind." I nodded toward the door, and Elliot Vance walked in carrying his laptop, followed by Russ Kowalski, whose face Bradley clearly half recognized from somewhere, maybe a traffic stop years back, maybe just instinct because the color went straight out of my son's face. Chelsea's voice came out sharp. "What is this? Walter, what's going on here?" I looked at her steady and said, "Carol's exactly what's going on." Elliot set his laptop on the conference table and played the kitchen footage without a word of introduction. Chelsea's own voice filled that small office, clear as day, introducing about the account being fully moved, about not needing the trust paperwork anymore. Then Bradley's voice, answering back, warning her not to get careless, like she had with Mom. The room went dead silent, except for that recording playing out loud, every single word landing like a hammer strike. Chelsea's face went white, then red, and she came up out of her chair so fast it scraped hard against the floor. That's not what it sounds like. That's taken completely out of context. Sit down, ma'am, Russ said calmly, showing his credentials for the first time. There are two deputies waiting outside this office right now, and anything you say from this point on can and will be used against you. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and a pending toxicology review connected to an exhumation request already filed with the county coroner regarding Carol Grady's cause of death. Bradley hadn't said a single word yet. He just sat there staring down at the table, and I watched something break loose in my son's face. Not innocence, because that had been gone a long time already, but the specific look of a man finally understanding there was nowhere left to run to. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. I never wanted her to actually die. I swear to God. It was only supposed to slow her down, keep her a little confused, so she wouldn't fight us on the paperwork. I felt Elliot's hand land on my shoulder, steady, holding me in place, because for 1 second the whole room tilted, and all I could see was Carol on that gurney I never got to reach in time. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Your mother stood at that stove every Sunday for 30 years, making sure you had a full plate before she ever sat down to eat her own, I said quietly. And you sat across from her counting the days until you got the house. The deputies came in 2 minutes later. Chelsea cried the whole way out to the car. Bradley never said another word. It's been almost 10 months now since that morning in Denise Callahan's office. Bradley pled guilty to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery, and is currently serving a 5-year sentence at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. Chelsea's case went further. The exhumation and toxicology review confirmed dangerously elevated sodium and related compounds in Carol's system, far beyond anything consistent with her prescribed treatment, and Chelsea was convicted of involuntary manslaughter alongside the financial charges. She's looking at 13 years. Ricky, it turned out, was Chelsea's younger cousin, a stock clerk at the pharmacy who'd been quietly swapping supplement bottles, and he's now facing his own separate charges. I still live in the house on Sumner Street. Some mornings, the quiet in that kitchen used to feel like it was going to swallow me whole. And now, most days, it just feels honest. I got every dollar of that retirement money back through the court. Though if I'm being truthful with you, the money was never really what any of this was about. Elliot Vance and I have become good friends since all of this, closer than I ever would have expected two old men in our 60s to get. He tells me now that Carol used to talk about me at that office more than I ever knew, always proud, always certain I'd do right by her if it ever came down to it. I set up a small fund in her name through the cardiology department at Bryan Medical Center for families who can't afford the follow-up monitoring that might have caught what was happening to her sooner. It isn't much yet, but it's growing, and every dollar in it carries her name forward doing something good, which is exactly the kind of thing that woman would have wanted. I think about that hallway outside the funeral home more than I probably should. Elliot's voice shaking on the other end of that phone, telling me to come see something before it was too late for it to matter. My wife protected me one last time from somewhere I couldn't reach her anymore, and I intend to spend however many years I've got left making sure that protection meant something.